There are moments in life that arrive without warning and demand everything from you in a single instant. No rehearsal, no second take. Just the raw collision between who you are and what the world suddenly throws at you. What happens in those seconds tells you more about a person than any interview, any carefully scripted appearance, any highlight reel ever could. Tonight we are going back to January 27th, 1984, to the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles, to a moment that was caught on camera, witnessed by hundreds and reported around the world. And we are going to decode it using a framework we call the 5 edges, because what Michael Jackson did in those terrifying seconds is one of the most instructive behavioral case studies in Grace Under Fire you will ever find. Here is the setup. Michael Jackson was filming a Pepsi commercial on a live stage in front of a crowd of roughly 3,000 fans. The production was elaborate. The stakes were enormous, and the energy in that room was the kind that only a performer at the absolute summit of their craft can generate. He was 25 years old, already one of the most recognized human beings on the planet, and he was deep into what the cameras were capturing. Then, without warning, a pyrotechnic charge fired prematurely. The sparks caught his hair. His scalp was on fire. Now here is the move, and this is where we have to slow everything down, because what the documented footage and eyewitness accounts show in the immediate aftermath is extraordinary. Multiple reports from people present that day, including crew members and journalists who covered the story, describe Michael Jackson continuing forward, not immediately registering what was happening to him on the outside the way you or I might. The crowd saw it before he did, when he was finally guided off the stage and led toward medical personnel. Witnesses and published accounts consistently noted that his behavior was composed. He was seen waving. He acknowledged the crowd. He was not screaming, not collapsing, not abandoning the moment in panic. The burns he sustained were real and significant. Second-degree burns to his scalp, painful and serious by any medical standard. And yet, the documented behavioral response in those immediate seconds was one of striking steadiness. So what explains that? This is where we bring in the mechanism, and the principle we are talking about has a name that is well established in performance psychology. It is called automaticity under stress, and it sits inside the broader framework of what researchers refer to as overlearned behavior. Here is how it works. When a human being repeats a complex set of behaviors thousands and thousands of times, those behaviors begin to migrate from conscious, deliberate control into something deeper and more automatic. The neural pathways become so reinforced, so grooved, that even when the prefrontal cortex, the thinking, reasoning, decision-making part of the brain, is flooded with a crisis signal, the body continues executing the trained pattern. This is the same phenomenon researchers have documented in elite military personnel, emergency responders, and high-performance athletes. The training does not just build skill. It builds a kind of behavioral architecture that holds its shape even when the emotional ground is shaking. Michael Jackson had been performing on stages since he was a young child. The behavior consistent with automaticity under stress in those seconds at the Shrine Auditorium reflects what happens when years of stage training, crowd awareness, and performance discipline become so deeply encoded that they function as a kind of psychological infrastructure. His nervous system had, through thousands of repetitions, built a default mode of composed public presence. When the crisis hit, that infrastructure did not disappear. It held. There is also a secondary principle at work here, and it connects to something performance psychologists call situational absorption, the state in which a performer is so fully immersed in the demands of a live performance environment that their attentional system is still partially anchored to the context of the stage even as a threat emerges. The crowd, the lights, the cameras, the expectation built into that space, all of it creates a powerful attentional frame. Stepping out of that frame, even in a genuine emergency, requires a conscious override that the brain does not always execute instantly. This is not recklessness. It is the documented behavioral signature of someone whose professional identity and trained responses are extraordinarily deeply embedded. Now let us talk about the cost and the payoff, because both are real. The cost is straightforward and serious. Second-degree burns to the scalp are not minor. The physical pain was significant, and the medical treatment was immediate. There is no glamorizing that. A real human being was genuinely hurt in those moments. The composed exterior did not mean the injury was not real. That distinction matters. The payoff, examined purely through the lens of behavior and documented public response, is this. The crowd did not descend into panic. The set did not become chaos. The people around him were able to respond more efficiently because the person at the center of the crisis was not adding a secondary wave of alarm to an already alarming situation. Composure in a crisis leader and a performer commanding a room of 3,000 people is functionally a crisis leader in that moment, creates space for the people around them to act. That is a documented dynamic in high-pressure environments, and the behavioral record from that day at the Shrine Auditorium reflects it. So here is the edge, the part you take with you. Composure under sudden crisis is not a personality trait you either have or you do not. The behavioral science is clear on this. It is a trained capacity. It is built through repetition, through putting yourself in high-pressure environments enough times that your nervous system develops a stable default response. You do not build that architecture in the moment of crisis. You build it before every professional rehearsal, every uncomfortable situation you lean into instead of away from, every time you stay present when instinct says flee. You are laying down one more layer of that infrastructure. Michael Jackson had been building his since childhood, and on January 27, 1984, it held. The question the 5 Edges framework always brings us back to is this. What are you building right now before your moment arrives, so that when it does, you already know how to stand?